who was working weeks, perhaps even months prior to the invasion to protect the museum.
Yeah, in one of the articles I wrote, and I think it's the article that comes out in the German publication later this year on the legacies of the libraries. Many people took precautions without or with the permission of the then Minister of Culture, or the head of the SBAH. And that worked very well. And actually, they got the experience from the first Iraq war, if you want, and especially the Iran-Iraq war in the 90s, when especially in the South, many museums were looted. And they knew that if the Americans would come, and everybody was convinced that they would, their collections would be threatened. So, for example, the House of Manuscripts hid their collections, and it actually was at that time an institution that took on a lot of manuscripts. And actually, there was a program going on to safeguard the manuscripts which they took out of other museums from the country. So they concentrated many manuscripts in that particular library to digitize them, etc. So they had a big program going on. They took very well precautions. They had a bomb shelter somewhere in the city, and thousands of manuscripts were put in aluminum boxes and put in this bunker. Now, that bunker was guarded, and especially with the help of the community. At one time, a military convoy went out and stopped at the bunker and wanted to see what was going in. And the people protected it. And they said, you cannot come in. And they forced their way in. And then what happened? Then there was sort of a riot. You know, people assembling, and scolded at the US military, because they already put up quite a few aluminum trunks with the manuscripts in their pickup truck. So they felt so threatened that they returned it back to the bunker and left. So that was a very good action.
In terms of looting, I mean, you worked in a period where there was illicit looting of cultural or archaeological sites.
Yes.
Were there any measures regarding the protection of those sites?
Yeah, definitely. John Russell organized via a UN program, I think, in cooperation with the Japanese authorities, I think 25 or 24 pickup trucks, Toyota, of course. When they arrived, they arrived already when I came to Baghdad, but they were hauled up at the airport. So the certain police people from the Ministry of Culture, they had their own sort of police force. Actually, the general, the commander of that particular police force was corrupt. We knew afterwards. Anyway, they went to the airport to pick up the trucks with all the drivers, like the inspectors came from the provinces to pick up the trucks. And the Americans didn't allow them. So I got a call and I said, okay. And again, I sent out a patrol, an American patrol, and I told them to get into the airport and to facilitate the people from the ministry to pick up the trucks, which they were rightly theirs. And that happened. So the role of a cultural advisor was much more than just protection of cultural heritage or culture in general. It was more facilitating the Ministry of Culture, the SBAH, the Antiquities department, etc., etc. So this worked. Then again, the story didn't end because there were not 24 pickup trucks at the airport. 2 or 3 were stolen, and some of them didn't have their ignition keys. So anyway, the patrol went back with in the slipstream the recovered pickup trucks, And on their way, actually they were robbed. The one inspector was forced, or I think he went to the bathroom somewhere near a gas station, and then he was forced to give his keys to some hoodlums, and they went off with the truck. So that was very, yeah. Well, that's a war zone. That those things happen, but the story didn't end there. So about 20 trucks were parked at the National Museum, and the inspectors were called to pick up their trucks. Then after a couple of weeks, one truck, I'm not quite from what province, was returned with the inspector saying, I don't want this truck because it's too new. And everybody would see that I'm cooperating with the Americans. So then I got angry and I went over there and I told Donny and I told the particular inspector, be creative. Do you want me to take a sledgehammer and to put some bumps in the car and scrape off the paint? What is this? Then everybody started to laugh. And I think this inspector went back with a sort of a crooked new truck. These things happen. I mean, you have to be creative. It's a war zone. But that particular inspector was right. Because when I first arrived at the National Library, the general director, Assad, got angry because I came with an US military patrol. And he said, don't come back here, not with the US military control. Everybody will see that I'm cooperating with the Americans. I said, I was shocked. And naive, apparently, too. And I knew he was right. So the next time I went, they sent out a patrol to pick me up. The patrol was with Kurdish fighters that protected the National Library as well. Now, I fully trusted the Kurdish guards because they had the best intelligence ever in Baghdad. And they were good fighters. So, but at one time, I think returning from the museum to the green zone, to the embassy, there was this policeman sort of regulating the traffic. And he looked at me. And I was always clothed in civilian. So I never wore or hardly ever wore my military uniform, which is to be discussed, but that's another story, which can be discussed. But I also, I had a gun, a pistol, and I just put it in my jacket. And this policeman looked at me and I thought, this is going wrong. Because there were always snipers on the top of the roofs that would take you out. So I took out my gun, I looked at him and pointed my gun to him. And he looked at me. And actually he was trying to make a phone call. He pulled out his telephone. And I didn't do anything. I just looked at him, stared him in the eyes. And then he put his telephone away. And the Americans told me to shoot through the window of the car. So I would have. Because it was he or me. Very simple. And I'm glad I didn't, because I probably would never forgive myself to have killed a person, whoever that might be. But it was at that time, it was he or me. Then I told the driver to continue and not speed up, especially not speed up and take the first left, which he did. And that's how I got out of there. This, is part of the deal. Another sort of similar story is, like I told you earlier, there was a price on my head. And at one time I was going to the Ministry of Culture, and the guards were South African. I think they were from Dynacor. They didn't know that I was Dutch and that I could understand them, because the South African language has its origins in Dutch. And they told to each other, I heard them over the walkie-talkies, over the communication lines, that we were followed. And that was sort of scary. But there was a helicopter for us too. So they were following us from the air. And then we suddenly took a left turn, and then apparently we were not followed anymore. But that was scary because there could be some people waiting for you, which actually happened to a colleague of mine. I shared my room with a senior advisor for the Ministry of Higher Education, and he was killed in the streets. He did not, well, as we would say in anthropology, he went native. He thought he was invincible and that he was in very good relations with the minister and his staff. But he was betrayed and they just executed him. But he never went out with a patrol. And I told him, it's very dangerous. It's a war zone out there. The insurgents are getting more powerful and powerful. He didn't listen and he got killed.
I mean, you say it's a war zone, and it was a war zone, but there were, as you said, there were targeted assassinations and attacks.
Mm-hmm.
So they knew who people were, as in the insurgents, generally speaking. How do you know there was a prize on your head, or a price?
The military told me.
And how did they know? I mean, did they find lists? Were there lists that were?
There were lists, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And you know that the entrance to the green zone or the exits, whatever you want, were guarded by spies, if you want. Yeah. So. Another story is just to show the listeners that it's not only about protection heritage, is that I got offered 2 tigers at one time. This was before Christmas by an US colonel. And I thought, what on earth am I going to do with 2 tigers? So, as a military, you were taught that everything that is normal in a peaceful society is abnormal in a war zone. And what is normal in a war zone is abnormal in a peaceful society. So you get the craziest things. So people were aggressive, the staff, for example, and especially the private security guards. They felt themselves like they were gods on earth. Very dangerous, very dangerous. Well, anyway, I got 2 tigers and I was in a sort of funny mood because, you work, let's say, 18 hours a day, very stressful. And so I said, are you going home for Christmas? He said, yeah. I said, do you got any children? He said, yeah, I got 2 boys. And I said, well, I got the perfect Christmas present for you. You got 2 tigers. He didn't like that and left the room insulted. Then I went over to the minister and told him the story. And he said, René, you can't do that. I agree with you that we could not accept the tigers for the Baghdad Zoo, but you have to be a little bit more careful and polite, which of course he was right. But I figured already, if we would accept the tigers, every tiger takes about, I think, if I remember correctly, 24 kilos of meat a day. And there were people starving out there. So, how you're going to do it? There was another point. Somebody else told me that maybe I was wrong too, because it was very important to reestablish normal life, to repair playgrounds for the children, and maybe to open museums and libraries, etc. Then I thought, yes, that's a good point. Next time I encounter a similar situation, I have to consider that. And actually, that is also what we discussed with Alexander Eskander. The point to stay and restore and repair the museum was because it was a location recognizable for all people. They knew if they wanted to go to the National Library where it was. So what he did with his staff, after we established that we would stay, that the library would stay in that location, they started scraping off the soot of the magazine room. So that's the first thing the staff of the library did with their own hand with scrapers, because Assad decided that the first thing to open the library anyway is to open the magazine room, so that people could come back and read the magazines. And it was a perfect decision, I think. I fully supported that. Yeah.
What happened to the tigers?
They never arrived. They're probably still in the zoo in Texas. Yeah.
So they were taken away. They were
Well, they
saved.
were not transported. It was an
Okay.
offer. So.
Oh, okay. They were an offer.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Another thing, which just I call them Indian stories in the sense of it's Wild West stories. At one time, I was in a military convoy going somewhere, and especially the military behave very badly. You probably have seen footage of Humphreys bumping into cars if they were in the way. They didn't care. They just went through like crazy, even against the traffic. I was in one Humphrey in a convoy, and they went against the traffic, and everybody was scared as hell. So it's crazy. I mean, that's why I didn't like to have a military convoy, because the soldiers were crazy. But at one point, we had to stop for a traffic light, which the driver didn't like, because you don't stop while driving inside Baghdad. At least that was the mood. And there was a young boy. He probably was selling newspapers, I think. And he came too close to the Humvee. And the guard got out of the car and threatened at point blank the boy. And I got so upset that I went out of the car too. And I said, get into the car. And if you don't get in and leave the boy alone, I will not get into the car, which means that they could not protect me, which they are, by definition, have to do, because I was a VIP. And that was what happened. So the guard went back into the car and we drove on. And I went back into the car. So this is all crazy stories.
You were threatened by a drunken bodyguard at some point?
Yeah, that's true. You couldn't trust the private guards either, especially the ones from Blackwater, which is another crazy story, which I'll tell you later, of KBR, which was attached to one of the ministers, Cheney, in the Bush administration.
Yeah.
Yeah, you would sleep on the outskirts of the embassy, let's say the gardens. Everybody thinks there was only the beautiful swimming pool, because that was published very often. But little of that was true. We all were in a container, and I shared the container with an Iraqi American, which we had no communication whatsoever. Besides, you only went to your container to sleep, and that's it. And there were two containers built parallel, and in between they were connected by a so-called wet unit, a shower and washing room and a bathroom. So you had to share that the bathroom and the shower. And of course, if you make use of that, you lock the door. And at one point, I think it was at night, I'm not quite sure, there was a knock on the door, and I said, occupied. And they kept banging on the door. When I was finished, I came out, and there is this guard, private security guard. Probably, well, definitely he was on drugs. He was high and drunk. I could hear they were fooling around with girls. And he threatened me. And I just didn't understand what was going on. And these are big guys. And I'm sort of a tiny guy. Well, not tiny, but I'm definitely not big. And I thought, oh my God, this is going bad. But I knew I did some martial arts. So I knew that don't enter a fight, try to avoid the fight. Because if you start a fight, both parties will get damaged whatsoever. Well, yeah. And so I tried to control myself, which went on very well, actually. And I lived in America for a while. So my let's say my collection of scolding words were pretty much at my availability. Well, that's just crooked English, but you know what I mean. I could then it became at a point I just didn't understand what he wanted from me, and I went back to my to my part of the container, and he kept following me. And at one point, he pushed me, and I flew back into the container. And I thought, well, I was taught never to, first of all, never to lose your temper, and second of all, try to avoid a fight. But this is the time that I have to fight back. And I was just about to do that when I thought I'll give him one more chance. So I pulled out my best American scolding instruments, which I will not repeat here in public. But I told him that he got fired and that he was fooling around with a 2-star general, and that he should start packing his stuff because he would be put on the plane tomorrow. And that seemed to have worked. And he returned to his container. Then I went to the military police, and these things happened often. Stressful situations, people got into fights, etc. And they sort of, well, they believed me, but they were not about to take any action. So I told them, if you don't do anything, I'll go to the ambassador and we'll see. Because I'm not going to stand for this. I'm here to do my work, and I don't want to be threatened by any security personnel. There's enough trouble outside the green zone. And then I got my own container in a different place, all by myself, easy. And so that's what happened. Yeah. So there are all these crazy stories. I mean, if you went out at night, Thursday night was our night out. And I befriended an American officer. Well, actually, he was a civilian at that time. So we went out for drinks sometimes at the Thursday night. But at one point, we were held up by an American patrol. And it's just like in a cowboy movie, or just like in, an American movie. We were treated as criminals. And they shouted to me to, well, I was driving to cut the lights, which I did. And apparently, you were not supposed to drive around with full lights within the green zone. I didn't know. And I was scared. These guys, they don't talk. They should. Anyway, yeah, it's not a crazy story. Very funny. So you were not only threatened by insurgents or whatsoever, or by incoming fire, which happened too. Actually, at one point, I was in the bathroom, and a grenade hit the palace, and right in front of my room. It exploded, and all the glass was all over the place, etc. And I was lucky I wasn't there. At another instant, 2 people got killed in another part of the palace by incoming fire, by a grenade. So, that's the situation you live in.
Just going back to the issue, the topic of Babylon.
Yeah. What I forgot, there's another thing which made Babylon extremely vulnerable, and not only because it was a regional command office, but also it was a regional office for the KBR. And I tried to find out who gave that permission, and I couldn't. Nobody knew why the KBR was there at the Babylon site.
So KBR is the company, the Kellogg, what are they called? The Kellogg, Brown and Roots, I think.
Yeah. Well, Rumsfeld took the decision to outsource many tasks of the U.S. military. A very liberal approach, and a very bad idea, actually, because they have their own command structures. Costs a lot of money anyway. Security guards got up to $1,000 a day. Anyway, KBR was then for the logistics and providing the meals, etc., etc. And they built the regional headquarters in the middle of the site of Babylon. The first day I went to Babylon, I saw a machine bulldozer flattening a piece of land in order to make it, to prepare it for construction. And I went over to them and said, "What are you doing?" These big bulldozers moving earth on the middle of the site. And well, you've been to Babylon, so the Antiquities. If you put your hand in the sand, and it's 90%, you have a chance that you pick up some kind of piece of antiquities, either a stone or whatever, a brick. I looked at it and I said, "Well, you got to stop. Who are you to tell me?" Blah 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 blah. So I looked at the political advisor of the military commander and said, "He has to stop, otherwise you get into trouble." So they stopped. I mean, they flattened huge pieces of land in the middle on the side of Babylon. A couple of weeks later, I got threatened. Actually, I got a threatening email from somebody at the staff of KBR that I could count my days, that it was not up to me to decide, blah 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 blah. But in that case, I didn't feel threatened. It didn't have any follow-up. So it was not only the military command, but also the KBR that perhaps, if you look at it, even more damaged the site than the military themselves.
But they were a military contractor, so
military
in a way, a military contractor. So in a way, they are part of the military. I mean, they act on behalf of the military.
Of course. Yeah, but you could very difficult control them, because we had already troubles with the dual command structure. On one side, the State Department, and the other side, the Ministry of Defense, the Pentagon. And now you got another one, it's KBR. So that, it was difficult. After we picked up the trucks and divided them or gave them to the provincial inspectors, I went back to a US command post in Hilla, near Babylon, to find out how we were going to support the local inspectors, because the inspector, or at least the guards at the sites, were threatened by heavy machinery and with heavy guns. So the point was to arm the guards. That was a hot issue all over Iraq, because the military didn't trust the Iraqis with guns, which was funny because everybody had a gun anyway. And so I made sure that the inspectors, at least the people on the ground, the guards, would have could get guns, and they were trained by. And I made sure that they were trained by the Americans to connect the archaeological site to a military U.S. unit, that in case there were trouble, they could rely on the support of the U.S. Military. Another thing what we did to make that happen, to facilitate that, is we gave them radio communication. So somehow or other, I got hold of money and managed to get every provincial inspector and people on the site connected to the military units in their neighborhood, in the vicinity, with the radio. So there was radio communication. So we trained that too. So we went to the units and to the military units and made sure that they trusted the Iraqi guards with the guns, and showed them that the sites were very much threatened by people who were very well armed and came into the sites with bulldozers.
And that's, I mean, the inspectors, we are speaking about the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage. Did you offer, were you able to offer any other support to them in Hilla, or in, the provincial SBAH, the State Board of Antiquities and Heritage office?
Yeah, there's another story. I mean, for the 7 months, I'm full of stories. Sometimes they're, like I said, Wild West stories, and sometimes they're appropriate stories on protection of heritage. Just to show, or just to share with the listeners how work as a cultural advisor in a war zone worked at least 15 years ago. When I talked to the political advisor of the Polish commander in Babylon, at one point, because I was negotiating with him for the whole group of people I represented, the Iraqi SBH, the local inspector, the staff of the embassy and the military. He was a sneaky guy. He was a very good diplomat, but he was sneaky too. And that's part of the trade. But I could stand that. Don't ask me why, but it just happened. And at one point during the negotiations, we had to stay over on the side. There was a sandstorm, and also the minister had to stay. So we were put in some kind of container or a house. And then he invited me to his place on the side of Babylon, and he said, "I got this beautiful bottle of Ukrainian vodka. Let's have a drink." And I thought, oh. So I shared one drink with him, and I said, "Okay, we can finish the bottle later, but now let's start negotiating," because I suspected he wanted to get me drunk. So then, during the negotiations, he was trying to push me in a corner and said, well, you know, if the Iraqis and if you don't want to do what we on the Polish side suggest in the handover of the site, I can always go to the provincial governor and the head of police in Hila, because they want the control of the site. And I said, "Oh yeah, no problem, do that." And I was sent in the military to return the site to the SBAH. And we'll see what happens. So there was a fight, and that continued for years afterwards. Who had the control of over the site of Babylon? Whether it was the provincial authorities with backup of the local police, or it was the SBAH. So you were confronted with that competition as well. In the end, the negotiations went very well, and the site was returned by the military, actually on December 28 or something like that, to the SBAH, so the national authorities.
Where did the military relocate to?
Albania.
Oh, and they just set up the same thing in Diwania. Yeah. They just moved everything there.
But you were asking me before whether I could have done more. Of course, in every respect, I could have done more, and I have to say sometimes I took the wrong decisions. Of course, I'm not the Pope, but you learn a lot by experience. Now, did I go to Iraq, to Baghdad, to get nice experiences? Of course not. My main motivation was to go and support the Iraqis, not the Americans, the Iraqis. And I was convinced that with my knowledge and experience, I could support the protection of Iraqi heritage and support my colleagues that were in great need, because everybody felt left out by the international heritage community. There were many articles. There was a lot of statements from UNESCO, ICOMOS, ICOM, but nobody was actually doing something. And that was my main point. Go there and see what you can do. And a very practical approach. And actually, I still find that, and still in my work with Heritage for Peace, we try to be very practical and get away from our desks in our beautiful countries, wherever we reside, outside the conflict zone. Of course, you need technical knowledge. You need theoretical knowledge. But to put it into practice is a different story. For example, recently I was invited for the third or fourth time to go to the UAE, to the United Arab Emirates, for an evaluation. And I decided already that I will not go back to the United Arab Emirates because it's just, I don't agree with the regime and with the human rights, especially for the 80% non-Emiratis living in that country and that are being abused. But this was going to be a digital evaluation. So I returned their mail and I told them I will never do that because the paper reality does not reflect the reality on the ground. And that's what I've always done. You have to go over there. At one point, an architect, Bureau of Architect, an officer invited me to tender with them on a new museum in Najaf. And I thought, okay. I said, when are we going over there? We're not. And I said, well, thank you very much. Goodbye. So for me, the foot on the ground, to be there, to see what's going on, to ask the people what they want is another important thing. I mean, what I want is, it's not important, really. What I can do, tell them I cannot fulfill their demands or their needs. Transparency is very, very important in this kind of work. So if they want a Mercedes, I will tell them, no, I will not do that. But maybe you can find somewhere else. And I will tell them why I think it's not necessary, first of all. And then secondly, I will tell them why I will not support that. For example, I got contacted while in Baghdad by an Italian professor. She wanted to digitize her collections. So I had to be in Rome anyway. So on my way to the Netherlands for my Christmas leave, I made a stopover in Rome. I met her for lunch and I asked her, what she wanted. And she said, well, I'm a professor in archaeology and actually the Middle East and cuneiform, blah, blah, blah. And I want to digitize my collection. I said, why? Well, it's important, and etc. I said, well, why do you think it's important? For whom? And she said, well, I have 30, 40 years of work there, and it's important for for research and stuff like that. I said, okay, well, why should I pay for it? I think the priorities are different in Iraq than just digitizing your collection. And then my next question was, how are you going to digitize your collection? And she said, well, that's why I need you, for conservators or for digitizing, for people who know how to digitize the collections. I said, are you going to invite any Iraqis for it? No, they're too stupid. I said, thank you very much for lunch, goodbye. That happens often. There were many projects also in the United States, for example, digitizing cuneiform collections at Stanford University, if I remember correctly. It had nothing to do with the problems our colleagues in Iraq were facing. So whether you should call these kind of things as taking an opportunity, making use of it, or abuse, I'll leave that up to the listener. In my opinion, I think it would be very close to abuse.
I guess you were powerless. I mean, people were feeling powerless.
Yeah, true. But you have to forget, you shouldn't forget that there was a lot of infighting between the people in power in Iraq. And we have seen that in later government and actually still today. That didn't make it very easy. For example, the Minister of Culture had a background as a Kurdish fighter. He was not Kurdish, actually he was Shia. And he was a member of the Communist Party. So that marks already his position within the government. And So I had to deal with all these kind of factions, if you want, which I was not that very much aware of at the time, only later, really. But that's, you know, the way the situation was, and to some extent still is, actually. For example, just another story. There was a program, an EU program, to fill up the libraries with new books. And we know that the university libraries all over the country suffered very much. A lot was stolen, a lot was lost in fires, etc. So it was very important to reorganize, or at least to reorganize the libraries and to put back the libraries on their feet. So higher education, but also school libraries for lower education could continue in the country and go back to normalcy, whatever that is. So I went over to the minister and I said, look, I think I could pull off to get you $1 million to fill up the libraries again with an EU project. And he said, oh, that's a great idea, René. He said, well, you know, I got some friends in Egypt and I'm sure I can get a good deal. And I said, look, and I experienced that earlier. This is the West. And if you want to make use of this program, you have to do it the Western way, whether you like it or not. So I need bills. And I also need somebody who could run the program. And he said, no, you know, it goes differently here in the Middle East, René. I said, yeah, I know, but that's not good enough for me. I have to be sure that I get bills so I can, you know, respond financially. I can be responsible for the finances for this project to the EU. They're very strict. He said, no, that's not going to happen. I said, well, tamam, khalas, finished. Next project. Yeah. These are the things you encounter. So you go from one problem to the other, from one suggestion to the other, you know, 14, 16, 18 hours a day. You get a call from a helicopter, US military. Are you the cultural advisor? Yes, sir, I am. I'm flying here in the vicinity of the Ministry of Culture, and there's a riot going on, but I'm not quite sure whether it's a riot or not. And we are about to break up the riot. I heard already, shoot the hell out of them, which happened before. I actually have footage on that. And so I said, hold your horses, call me back in 15 minutes. Can you do that? Yes, sir, we can. So I asked my secretary, what's going on at, call the ministry and find out what's going on. And go ask around. She was a Christian, my secretary, whether it's a Sunni or a Shia holiday or whatever, a national holiday, I need to know within 10 minutes. So she ran around the embassy, came up with the Shia holiday, and that's what they're celebrating. The people at the ministry didn't know. So I called back the commander of the helicopter and I said, hold your horses. This is a Shia holiday. Leave them alone. This is just a religious expression. Thank you very much, sir. We'll fly on. It's life. That's life in Baghdad.
Yeah. Did you have a remit over the Kurdistan region of Iraq? I mean, was it just the rest of the country?
No. Later on, I went to Erbil to be the only foreigner at the cultural festival. But that was after my my tour in Baghdad. It was a funny meeting, actually. I was the only foreigner. And I met the advisor of the ministry, forgot his name. I'm ashamed that I forgot his name, the one who got killed. I was very good friends with him. And the funny thing was that there were a lot of expats there, you know, Iraqi artists living in the Netherlands, the UK, France, etc. And also people, local artists. And you saw the split and there was a discussion between them because the expats were criticizing the people, their colleagues that stayed as being conservative, etc., etc. So there was a very strange discussion, I thought. But that's what you often encounter of people who leave the country, have a certain look a certain belief of what or a certain look of the country they left. But the country they left years ago, of course, is not the same country where they returned to. This is the problem of immigrants. So you had this discussion, and I didn't like the discussion. At one particular time, it went even ugly. So I asked around a little bit and talked to the expats, especially the ones living in Paris, London, and Amsterdam. And I told them that this was my observation. The last thing I wanted to say is that to have power, so much power, that you even were part of setting up the summertime in Iraq, that together with then with the deputy minister, you decided on a Women's Day, supported by the German embassy, that power corrupts. And I'm not Iraqi. I'm from a totally different world. And even when during the discussions about the Jewish archives and other matters, Saad Iskander wanted me to go to the United States to represent Iraq. And I'm not going to do that. I do not represent Iraq. I'm a Dutch guy. I'm here to facilitate. And I'm not representing Iraq. And the minister fully agreed. He got angry too. And besides that, I think as a Director General of the National Library and Archives, it's your task to represent Iraq in the sense of libraries and not me. So I made clear to everybody that I was there to facilitate and to help them out, whatever I could do. And sometimes it was shocking to see that how much power you have. So it was good to leave Iraq after 7 months. Like I said, I was close to PTSS, post-trauma syndrome, and I was struggling with all the power I had. I got offered an extension, actually, which I was not quite sure to accept it or not. And I must admit there was a lot of money involved. I discussed it with my wife, and we decided I'm not going to continue. Besides that, the offer was withdrawn anyway. So it was time to go home and to leave my friends and colleagues in still a deplorable situation, which hurts. But for me, it was the end. And an experience like that never leaves you. People get killed. People got killed. In the media, you're at one point a very favorite subject, which I didn't like at certain points anymore. It should be the Iraqis the media should be talking to, and not me. But the danger, the bad and the good, the positive and the negative, it will never leave you. Anybody who has been in a war zone, it will leave scratches on your heart and your mind.
In terms of post-traumatic stress, I mean, how have you been able to address that over the past few years?
I cried a week when I returned from Baghdad to the Netherlands. We moved before I went to Iraq, and I left my wife with a house full of nothing. It was restored for about half a year, and everything was bare. And during Christmas, I was so hyper that my friends who organized a dinner for me didn't recognize me. And then I thought, I have to take it easy, which I did actually. After I returned to Baghdad, I made sure that I got more sleep and tried not to be so hyperactive. And I had to come down from the position of a powerful position, and everybody was asking me and giving me all the full attention to become a normal citizen again. That takes a while. We had some heavy talks with my wife to come down from that position, that not everything in the world is turning is about me. But I didn't last that long. There were possibilities of getting psychological support from the army, but I thought I never really needed that, and it did. I didn't. Sort of faded away, but especially when this good friend of mine, the advisor of the minister, got killed 2 or 3 years later. I started crying again the whole day. So still now, in this podcast, some emotions come up and tears fill my eyes. It never leaves you.
But of course, you weren't alone. I mean, this is in many ways a common experience for a lot of people who go to Iraq or are from Iraq, who suffer or are still suffering for the fact that there's been so much instability and so many dreadful detrimental effects of the US occupation and instability in general and the legacies of dictatorship. I mean, there's a lot to deal with.
True. Yeah, definitely.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess when you were there, or anyone who's actually in Iraq proper, is actually suffering significantly from, from a legacy of events.
No, true. And I don't want to get into a competition of who got the most grief. I told you the story the way I experienced it. It does have some certain advantages on the international stage. People believe me. I'm one of the few people who went into a war zone to protect cultural heritage. So it definitely adds to my credibility. On the other hand, for myself, I learned, of course, a lot. Although my experiences are confined to 7 months Iraq and 6 months Afghanistan, being in a war zone, I perhaps have a little bit more feeling than others on how it is to work and to judge projects that I found sometimes totally ridiculous and totally not in place, because it's not very practical. It's designed behind the desk. There's nothing to do with the real situation on the ground. I mean, so many people do not know how difficult it is to send goods, for example, to Iraq or Syria or Yemen, or to transfer money. No, the recent projects the Heritage for Peace had in Iraq with a lot of problems sending the money. We found a solution, and so it did work. So, even if you have money, it's still difficult. And a lot of people don't realize it. A lot of people, especially the funding agencies, want to have a total control over the projects and do not trust the people on the ground and do not give them enough responsibilities. It has to change. And there's a big discussion on that issue within the humanitarian and emergency aid, and also for the relevant for the heritage projects, for helping our colleagues in war zones or other fragile states. So you learn and you use that experience, hopefully for the better, and I think I do, for other projects. To be, even one project we did in for Syrians, I gave a security class for a Syrian archaeologist. I said, how are you going to the sites to make a damage assessment? I said, well, we pick out the we go into the car or pick up the motorbike and go in. I said, you cannot do that. It's a danger zone. Who am I to tell you that it is a danger zone? So I told them, always go by 2 persons. Check out the route, check out what kind of militias are on the way, and perhaps avoid them, and checking out another route. Have somebody constantly on the phone in the main office, if they have an office at least, and phone in every 15 to 30 minutes. And then if there's military presence on the site or around it, and you feel in danger, get out. And they were laughing, and they said, well, we never thought about it that way, but this is all practice. And it was funny, actually, to tell the Syrian archaeologists that they were busy much too, much too dangerous, and not minding their own security, and me telling them that they should. Yeah. Well, thinking of that experience of my work in Baghdad, in hindsight, it was an important point in my life, both personally and professionally. To work in a conflict zone is an experience, like I said earlier, which will never leave you. But it makes you a little bit closer, or it gives you a little bit insight into the suffering and the mechanisms of people living in a warm conflict, in a violent conflict, and what the possibilities are of protecting heritage during a violent conflict. And so working on Syria now with Heritage for Peace since, I don't know, 8 years, yet in other countries again. That actually came about because I went there as a military. So afterwards, there was a lot of discussion whether I should have done that, to be what I called in one article, to be an embedded archaeologist. And I came up with that term because of embedded journalism. We had a lot of discussion, especially with the World Archaeological Congress in Dublin. I was attacked in public and private. Then I started reflecting on that experience, and is this the only way to support our colleagues who are living in a conflict and try to protect their own heritage, meaning the only way being through the military? And then I came up with, well, the answer, well, no, it is not. You've seen a lot of humanitarian aid workers there. You see civil servants, and those are the most positive ones, actually. There are, of course, a lot of crooks and crooked NGOs working in conflict zones too. So you have to watch out there. Then I thought at the World Archaeological Congress in Jordan, and I met this young Syrian guy, and a PhD student or an MA student in archaeology living in Barcelona, and he came up with the idea: what can we do what can we do for our colleagues in Syria? So at that point, just a few months later, we came together in Barcelona, where he lives, and we said there are other ways of supporting our colleagues, and we started our NGO, Heritage for Peace. Very idealistic in the beginning, of course. I mean, it wasn't easy to start. We didn't have any money, but we paid everything ourselves in the beginning. First of all, the point was to after my experience, and also looking more closer to the humanitarian emergency aid in conflict zones. They have their standards put down in the handbook of the Sphere project. They have the code of conduct, and we copied that actually into the statutes of Heritage for Peace. And also the idea came that if you start working during a conflict as people from an NGO, is there anything else we can do? the idea came that if we started supporting the people, asking them questions, what do you need, what do you want? Meanwhile, the people approach us and we don't really have to go out. So the people from Tigray and Myanmar, they come to us for help. And the idea was to bring the different groups together, because in the end, the best protection of cultural heritage in a conflict zone is ending the conflict, which is peace. Because, that's the ultimate solution. So to strive for peace, also as heritage workers and also as humanitarian workers, just makes sense. It's only logical. And we did it. We started it. For example, we worked for the opposition groups in Syria. We worked with the government in Syria, that is the DGIM, the Director General of Antiquities and Monuments. We put them together in a room during a conference in Spain. So we left the room and said, start talking. We drew up sort of a kind of a charter in the sense of UNESCO for the peace talks in Geneva, for the opposition groups. That was the peace talks between the different groups in Syria that came together in Geneva. We did the same thing for Libya. So, but there are different levels. Now we work on different levels. Just to be on the side, like the projects we have in Raqqa now, which is track 1, but there are also track 2 and track 3. And we work on all levels now. So that is actually all I learned from my experiences in Iraq, and later a little bit from my experience working in conflict in Afghanistan. First of all, is because of my personal experience, I have compassion and empathy with the people suffering during a conflict. Don't see them as victims, which is actually, if you consider them as victims, you silence them. But they're very active people. Actually, the first responders. If you look at all conflicts, who are the first people who protect their heritage? They're the people in the surroundings, the people in situ. The first people who started protecting their heritage sites during the Lotus Revolution were the local population around the archaeological sites in Egypt. So they're not silent victims. So you can activate them and try to search and contact, etc. And then second of all is, well, the most important, but it's a big discussion now in how to put that in humanitarian actions now, emergency programs, is they give the people on the ground more power. So, don't go there with a suitcase full of ideas and say, well, you should do this or you should do that. If people approach us, we said, what do you want? And we try to figure out how we can help you and support you. And sometimes you cannot. Then you say, you have to be transparent and open and very, very honest. Because trust, which is a main quality in especially in conflict zones, as we say in Dutch, trust comes by the horse, and no, it comes by piecemeal, step for step, and it goes by horse. It goes very quickly. So trust is very important, and the only thing to be trustworthy is to be transparent and open. And I experienced those kind of things. If I wouldn't have been open and honest with the minister, I wouldn't have gotten that far in Iraq. And certain things you couldn't do. I told you the story about the EU project and the books. He didn't want it the way, according to the rules of the EU. Khalas, finished. So, yeah, I learned a lot and I used it. in the rest of my work today.
And that's important for you because it means that you continue to engage with archaeologists and with people working in heritage, you know, after this experience in Iraq, Afghanistan. It's continuing engagement. That's important for you.
Yeah. That's what keeps me alive, literally and figuratively now. Yes, I think I can contribute something. Now, during the pandemic, it is difficult to travel. And actually, you invite me to go to Iraq, which I would have loved to do that, but especially now during the pandemic, it is next to impossible. But I would have, gone to other places, certainly to meet people from the Syrians, at least in Turkey, etc. Yes, the importance, I think, in my work, in our work, is you have to be there on the spot, to talk to the people, to ask for their needs, to ask what they want, and if that is possible or not, to picture them from my side, at least, a clear situation, what you can offer and what you cannot offer. This is, for example, what we do now in Myanmar. First, to find out what the situation is, what the people want from us, what they need, and then see how we can support them or not. And you have to give it, to be transparent, you have to give them a clear picture. We cannot do this for you, we cannot do that for you, but we can do this, but there is always the risk, etc., etc. And it's definitely not always money, certainly not. People think it's always about money. It's not. Get the people in the Middle East, help them to organize themselves, either at a regional level or a national level. Try to support the formation of unions for conservators, for museum staff, for library staff within Iraq, for example. It has been very difficult so far. Try to convince people at the top or whatever, or support them from bottom up, to get them, to get organized and share, which is very important because, in my view, the Middle East has been, and our colleagues in the Middle East have been very much underestimated by the post-colonial Western world. The problem is that they are the main funding agencies, and many projects are post-colonial. They don't trust the people, they don't trust our colleagues in the Middle East. And also, I think that the people in the Middle East, our colleagues, are underestimating themselves. My first question was, somebody in the group asked us, our colleagues in Myanmar, do you need any training? This is post-colonial. That is a wrong question. Because if you ask somebody if they need training, then you suppose that people do need training and that they are not well trained. So this is these things, and it's not respectful either. And I think that the people in our colleagues in the Middle East definitely underestimate themselves. There's a very good conservation lab in Tehran, for example, but that, of course, is politically difficult. Especially Iraq was the main port for cultural heritage in the Middle East up until years ago. ICOMOS had their office, ICOM had their office, UNESCO had their office. Nothing has become of it. It's all gone to the dogs. But the people are strong, and they should not be underestimated. And of course, if they think that their education system lacked or was lacking in the past, which it was in the 90s and the 80s, the libraries were neglected, the museums were neglected, it was difficult to get contact abroad. There's actually another thing that I did was to support the DG, the General Director of Inland, to connect to the outside world. And actually we went to Paris, and I introduced him to, or well, he was introduced to the National Library in Paris. We introduced him to UNESCO, to ICOMOS, and to ICOM. That is another thing that we can facilitate, connections between the countries and the international community. And it's not me who should really call UNESCO and tell them, you know, you have to go to Iraq and the people are suffering, blah, 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 blah. It is facilitating the connection. It's facilitating the context between the people on the ground, their own organizations, and the international heritage community. So that I think is important. But one point is people underestimate themselves, and they definitely should try, in spite of all the differences they have, ethnic, religious, or otherwise, have to work together, because cultural heritage is a concern for all the people in the country, and they should step over their own shadows and get organized. Tamam?
On that note, René, thank you for taking the time to speak with me and speak about your experiences and recent history working in Iraq, and of course, the weight of that in terms of the stress and reflection. I think all those things have been quite important when it comes to looking back, you know, at what is now 18 years since the Iraq War. So thank you again, and I wish you the best of luck. And I hope to hear from you very soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Shukran.
Shukran.